back into caveman days, like if you got sleepy and you were being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, there was a mechanism in your head that said, don't lie down and take a nap, just from an evolutionary perspective. And so what we do a lot of times is when we hear these signals or we see these signals or we feel them, like we yawn or our eyes are at half mast or maybe our workout isn't as good as it was, we don't even think about it. We just say, oh yeah, we're tired. I'm the sleep doctor and I sleep 6.5 hours, but I track my sleep. And so I have such high quality sleep that I can sleep 6.5 hours and have this level of energy and have had no coffee today.
Happy birthday to you.
It's a topic that I love passionately, that I feel like most people, especially in this current society, think of almost secondarily. It's sort of like, hey, it's this thing that just happens by itself. It's this thing that just like, oh well, I'll do all the stuff on my to-do list first, and then that'll just happen after.
It's usually an afterthought, and it's usually at the end of the day, and it's usually people saying, "Oh, okay," and they're falling asleep while they're eating or on their computer or in front of the TV, and then magically they go back to their bedroom, brush their teeth, wash their face, get in bed, they're wide awake, they can't fall back asleep, and the process starts. So, no, trust me, I get it.
Yeah, it's definitely something I've been guilty of in the past, where it's like, hey, I've got this long to-do list. I will hustle and grind myself up through doing, 20, 22 hours of stuff. And then when I'm done, I'll sleep, when I can. It's not this thing we think of as proactive for our benefit of intentionally getting your rest in and your sleep in because you want to be more effective.
Yeah, well, to be honest with you, there's a mechanism in your brain that actually tells you the opposite. So long ago, we kind of discovered, like back into caveman days, like if you got sleepy and you were being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, there was a mechanism in your head that said, don't lie down and take a nap, right? Right? And that's let's keep going on. And what our body is actually trying to say is like, hey, dude, stop, like slow down, like I need to repair, I need to recover. There's a lot of things that have to kind of go on here for me to be able to do all the things you want me to do. But people just keep going and going.
Yeah, it's almost like this debt that we keep taking money out of a bank that we don't really see how much it's adding up yet.
To be fair, I'm not a fan of the debt analogy, and let me explain why. Because debt only tells us about quantity and it doesn't tell us about quality. Like, I'm convinced, by the way, I sleep maybe 6.5 hours. I'm the sleep doctor. I sleep 6.5 hours, but I track my sleep. And so I have such high quality sleep that I can sleep 6.5 hours and have this level of energy and have had no coffee today. Right. So I think, like I agree with the whole idea of there's an amount of time that everybody needs. But number one, I think that time is different for different people based on their age, based on their gender, based on a whole host of things. But also, I want to highlight the quality of sleep. It turns out to be even more important than the quantity.
And I don't think so. I think, where do I start there? There's so much to this. I think a lot of people look at sleep as only a measurement of time, not quality. Right? I think the conversation on quality is almost non-existent. So even when you look at sleep, it's like this thing that you have to do before you get to do your to-do list again tomorrow. And they sort of think like, it's again with whatever's left in the day. Let's just do all the things we have to do, and then whatever's left, I'll sleep up until my alarm goes off the next day. Right? The time window shrinks because you got to get up and you got to be at your first meeting by 9 o'clock, which means you have a deadline. Right. So the later you work, the less sleep you get. And it becomes this thing where we're like, oh, well, if I get less sleep, I'll just be tired. I'll just have an energy drink. I'll have a coffee and I'll muscle through.
Yeah. And I think that is hyper common. And I think the big thing to remember is caffeine is not a replacement for recovery. Right. So a lot of things happen inside the body when we sleep. And, in my new book, Sleep, Drink, Breathe, Wellness is Too Complicated, I really talk to people like you don't have to know a ton about sleep, right? You just have to know certain kind of basic idea sets. And that's really where you can kind of understand how valuable it becomes to all of your other pursuits. And I think that's something that a lot of people just forget about. It's like, well, I can still do all my other activities off of 5 hours of sleep, but like, how good is my workout? Right? Like, and not to get too personal, but like, how good am I at intimacy with my partner when I'm half asleep? Probably not that great, right? How good am I at giving a presentation or a lecture? How good of a dad or a mom am I when I'm tired, right? I don't think I'm very good at that. And so when we think about sleep, we really need to think about it as this kind of different aspect. I love that you said people just think about it as time, because I never really think about it like that because it's so multidimensional to me. But you're absolutely right. So many people just say this is a timeline thing and I just have to get through it so I can get to go do my other things. And it's like, it's not a race, right? Like it doesn't really work that way. Like everybody's going to get there. It's how you get there and how easily your body gets there. And then that allows your body to do all these cool things later.
Agreed. And you look at it, you have kids?
I do. I have two kids, a 22-year-old and a 21-year-old.
So you're maybe a little bit removed from this sort of part of the process, but
oh no, I remember it, brother.
So my kids are 8 and 11, and not so much now, but definitely in the younger ages, you can certainly tell when their mood, their behavior changed when they needed a nap. And I like to say, at what point do we as adults not realize that like that still continues? You can realize they're a totally different person emotionally, physically, when they're tired. You're like, hey man, go take a nap. You need a nap. And at some point, we as adults, we're just like, oh, we're good. We don't need sleep anymore. We can just hustle and grind our way through.
Well, I think part of it has to do with caffeine, right? Kids don't drink a lot of caffeine, hopefully. And so they don't have, also, our boss isn't walking through the door saying, hey, you know what? I think you need some sleep. Our boss is walking through the door and saying, hey, why aren't your numbers up? Where's your productivity? Like, what's going on there? So when we're a kid, we have this guiding force called our parents. And sometimes we have one, sometimes we have two, sometimes we don't have any. But we have a guiding force in our life that's telling us, hey, you need to go do this for your health. When we hit the adult workforce, unfortunately, we have to be our own guide. That was part of the reason why I wrote the book, because to be honest with you, it's kind of complicated. Like, I don't know if you've I know you've kind of looked around the wellness industry lately. People don't know if they're supposed to drink a green thing, jump into a cold plunge, get a sauna. Like, I just want people to learn how to hydrate, right? Like basic stuff. And when you get the basics right, everything else falls into play. That's why I kind of call them the dominoes of health.
Yeah, which makes sense. And I think, when you talk about productivity, a lot of people don't know how to qualify how productive they are, right? So they don't necessarily understand, yes, you could stay up until 1 o'clock in the morning working. However, the 3 hours it takes you to do the thing, if you get a good freaking night's sleep, you could wake up in the morning and accomplish the same amount of work in one.
Easy. It's well, and if we just thought about it from like the business world, like let's say we're going to put on our business filter right now and just think about sleep as business. Holy crap. Sleep is a moneymaker for people and they don't even realize it. So there's actually been a study that looked at employees and when they're not sleeping well, how does it affect business? I actually got asked this question, believe it or not, by Donald Trump. I was in the green room at the CBS Early Show, and he was on just before me, and he found out that I was a sleep specialist, and this was, by the way, like 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So he asked me a lot of questions like, what does it cost, right? Like, what does sleep cost the American business? Believe it or not, there's been a study, $2,300 per employee. So every employee that you have is wasting roughly $2,300 per year based on something that they're doing with their sleep. So there's absenteeism, there's presenteeism, there's safety concerns, there's just general mess ups. It's remarkable how we can actually quantify this to the dollar. Then we look at concepts within business like resilience. Like that's a big business concept that a lot of people say, hey, you got to be resilient. You got to get up after you've been knocked down. You got to keep going. You got to keep going. Dude, I can show you evidence that sleep directly affects the concept of resilience in every human on earth. If you aren't sleeping well, you are not resilient. You're at the bottom. You know what I'm saying? It's like your body battery is down to like 1%. Dude, if you think you're going to, jump the chasm on that, it isn't going to happen.
Yeah, I love that. So Now let's go back to when you said you get 6 hours of sleep. That's your norm, right? A lot of people. Okay, I'm roughly in the 6 hour timeline. For me, that's like no matter when I go to bed, like 6 hours for me is like, all right, cool, you're recovered. I don't wake up with an alarm clock. I find it better personally. I'm like able to do so where it's natural.
Do you wake up at roughly the same time every day? So that's the reason why you're able to do this. So for people out there listening, what Jim has described is kind of an interesting scenario where his body wakes up at a particular time every single day. Probably doesn't even mean for it to happen. Like you said, you probably don't use an alarm anymore. This is actually a sign of really good circadian rhythmicity. So that means your body is on this rhythm and it knows it and it's honoring it and it's actually doing it. And so what's cool about that is it kind of forces you to go to bed a little bit earlier than you probably might have wanted to, right? So if you know your brain is getting you up at 6 a.m. or 5:30 or whatever your time is, you then start counting backwards and you're like, holy crap, like I don't think I want to stay up and watch, Game of Thrones for the 12th episode of the night, right? Maybe I should just get my ass in bed.
So now a lot of people, I think the standard is 8 hours. That's what most people are told.
8 hours is a myth. I want to be super duper. I didn't mean to cut you off. I want to be super duper clear. Like, let me just tell you the math on this and why 8 hours actually doesn't work. So the average sleep cycle is between 80 and 120 minutes, which is roughly, we call it roughly an average of 90 minutes, right? So let's say 90 minutes is a sleep cycle. When you go across everybody, the average human has 5 sleep cycles, right? So 5 times 90 is 450 minutes, divided by 60 is 7.5 hours. Dude, the math doesn't even work, okay, for 8 hours. The math doesn't even work, right? So where did we get this recommendation? In the 50s, a group of sleep researchers locked a bunch of people into a time chamber and they said, no lights, no time. We're going to leave you in here for 30 days. They gave them food, bathroom, all that kind of stuff. And here's what ended up happening is by the end of the 30 days, their bodies wouldn't allow them to sleep longer than 8 hours plus or minus 13 minutes. That's where we got the recommendation from a sleep researcher in the 50s. Okay. Now, let's look at sleep now. I believe that sleep is an evolutionary process. I don't think that sleep in the 50s is anything like sleep it is today. And so I think we really have to start to understand what it is we're talking about. When you wake up after a period of time and you feel refreshed and ready to meet the day, that is probably the amount of sleep that your body needs. To be fair, though, you have to be your own best metric. So you have to wake up and say to yourself, hey, do I feel like dog shit or do I feel good? If I don't feel good, then, hey, I need to look at the quantity or the quality of the sleep that I'm getting so that when I wake up, I feel good. And once you get to the point where you wake up and you feel good, game over. You're done. You figured it out.
100%. And I think that number is going to be a little different for every person. Is that right? So like for one person.
Well, and not even to mention that, like, let's just talk about women in general, okay? Like, women will have a different number based on where they are in their menstrual cycle. So you can even have a different number in a month. If you're female, as an example, I have a lot of patients who need more sleep before their period, less sleep after. I've got some patients who are opposite. So their amounts and their qualities are going to change even in a 30-day cycle. Nobody needs to lock and load on a number. What you need to lock and load on is how do you feel in the morning and how consistently can you do that? If I had one tip to give everybody about sleep, it's about waking up at a consistent time. Notice I didn't say going to bed. Waking up at a consistent time, which you already do based on your own circadian rhythms, which is awesome. Here's why this becomes so critically important is when you the time that you wake up directly affects the time that melatonin is produced in your body at night. So if you wake up at a variable time in the morning, melatonin is produced in a variable way at night, which means your body isn't ready for sleep. It's ready at variable times. Therefore, if you want your body to go to bed at a certain time, if you wake up at that time consistently, about 14 hours earlier, it will work. Let me give you the example. I wake up at 6. 14 hours later is 8 p.m. That's when melatonin will start. It takes about 90 minutes for it to get up and in. I'll start to get sleepy around 9:30, 10 o'clock, and I may go to bed early, but usually for me, I like to actually stay up until midnight, right? That's how the process usually goes for most people out there. So when you start to think about it, if you have variability in the morning, you're screwing yourself up at night. Just wake up at the same damn time on Saturday and on Sunday that you do on Monday through Friday, and problem is solved.
Now, you talked about melatonin. No, a lot of people will take either a melatonin gummy or something when they are getting ready for bed. Okay, why?
So this is going to take me about 2 minutes to get through. I'm just warning everybody now. So melatonin is a hormone. Most people don't actually know that. They think it's just a supplement or a vitamin or something like that. And it snuck in the 70s under the FDA's regulatory eyes. And so you can make it in your garage and you can sell it in the local health food store. And number one, that is a perfectly legal thing to do. So understanding the purity as well as the amount that's in the melatonin itself becomes an issue. To that point, about 6 years ago, and then before that, about 5 years ago, 11 and then 5 years ago, there were two studies that were done where they pulled about 30 different melatonin brands off the shelf. They did a gas chromatograph on them to see how much was actually in there. Not a single one had the amount on the bottle that was in the pill. Half of them were over and half of them were under. Okay, so buyer beware. Melatonin is not what you're looking for here. By the way, melatonin isn't a sleeping pill. Melatonin is not a sleep initiator. Melatonin is a sleep regulator. Let me explain. There's two systems in the brain. One is called your sleep drive. The other is called your sleep rhythm. The way I think about this is you could think of drive like hunger, and you could think of rhythm like lunchtime, right? So you're hungry, and if it's the right time of day, you eat lunch. Same holds true with sleep. If your drive is high and your rhythm is right, you sleep. But if either one of them is off, you have a sleep disorder. Melatonin only affects rhythm. It does not affect drive. But 90% of people think it's Ambien, and they take it thinking that it's going to work that way. Also, the dosage is almost always wrong. The correct dosage based on the data out of MIT is between 0.5 and 1.5 milligrams. Dude, I can't find it in any drugstore in a gummy anything less than 3 milligrams, right? So again, people are finding the wrong thing. Another problem is melatonin should not be used in children ever. Most people don't know this, but melatonin is actually a contraceptive. Yes, you heard me say that correctly. Melatonin is used for birth control. Oh, and by the way, did you know that melatonin affects your diabetes medication? It affects your antidepressant medication. It affects your birth control, and it affects any heart medication. It's a circadian pacemaker, everyone. This is the thing that tells your body if it's breakfast, lunch, or dinner. Okay? Guess what? When you start loading a bunch of that in there, you screw up that circadian rhythm, and it affects everything else that you've put into the system. Right? So if you're taking blood pressure medication, if you're taking an antidepressant, if you're taking birth control, and you add melatonin to the mix, you have now made all of your medication less effective. Okay? I don't know about you, but I would want my birth control to be as effective as I would want it to be. And that can, again, be a problem. Now, when we're talking about kids, and the reason why we don't want kids to have it is, number one, I can't think of any reason why a young female developing body should have birth control without there being a particular reason from a doctor. But number two, did you know that kids have 4 times the amount of melatonin that they need in their heads anyway? Like, they don't need it. Like, it's completely unnecessary. Oh, and by the way, you just taught your child that they need a pill to sleep. That's pretty stupid, right? I don't think that's a great idea. So my soapbox on melatonin is there are 4 different situations where I think melatonin is useful. Jet lag, shift work, something called REM behavior disorder, which is a particular sleep problem. There's new data to show that it could be helpful with ADD and ADHD, and in people with a melatonin deficiency who have insomnia. Those are the people that should have melatonin. People come to me all the time and they're like, what supplement should I take for sleep? My theory is very different than most people. I tell people, go get blood work done. I want to know what your deficiencies are first. Let's fix your body before we start adding new shit to it. You know, I tell people all the time, I'm pretty sure that you're not deficient in ashwagandha, okay? But you might be deficient in vitamin D, iron, melatonin, magnesium. Like, these are the essential things that we have to get this unit working. So let's stop fucking around and just get that straight first.
100%. I love that. So now I'm curious because anytime I've taken melatonin, I don't know how it's affected my quality of sleep, but one thing I have noticed is the vividness. Yeah, that. Why?
Because you're overdosing. That's the number one sign of overdosing of melatonin. So my guess is you probably took a 10 milligram gummy, not knowing any better. By the way, nobody knows any better but sleep doctors. And that's probably what happened. If you lowered the dose, it would be more effective. I want to be super clear. I use melatonin when I travel to Europe. Okay, that's what it's for, right? If I have to work, let's say I had to work a week-long shift in the sleep lab where I had to be up at night dealing with patients, I would take melatonin. That's an appropriate use for it. Also, if I did blood work and we found out that I'm low in melatonin because I'm 56 years old, and then I would use it. But again, it's really not for public consumption, yet everybody does.
Interesting. So then I guess if we simplify this back down to sleeping, drinking, and breathing, right? It sounds like a pretty solid idea. Now, let's talk about going to sleep, because I think like for a lot of people, the sleepy time routine is maybe I'll grab my melatonin and I'll go doom scroll on my phone for an hour and a half until eventually it smashes me in the face.
Yeah. Or I'll smoke a bunch of weed, right? Or I'll drink a bunch of alcohol, or I'll do something to basically conk myself out, right?
So what's the better way?
Boy, that is a loaded question. So there's a lot of better ways. So number one, the thing I'm probably most famous for is getting people to know and understand something called their chronotype. So you might not have heard of this term before, but you actually have. If you've ever been called an early bird or a night owl, those are chronotypes. So if people wandered over to chronoquiz.com, we put that into the show notes for people to be able to click on it, you can figure out which category of sleeper you are. And by the way, these are genetic. You don't actually get to pick them. So if we know you're an early bird, I have very specific things I can tell you to do in order to get to sleep easily and wake up fine. But if you're a night owl, those things don't work on night owls. We have to have something completely different. So the number one thing that I tell people in my book, in Sleep, Drink, Breathe, is we have to figure out what your chronotype is first. Then I can actually give you the guidelines. I can say, hey, if you're an early bird, what I call a lion, I want you to go to bed at this time and I want you to wake up at this time, because in our surveys, that's when most lions do that. And what you end up with, higher quality sleep, and you don't need as much. That's the key. I actually give people more time back in their days by sleeping within their what I call chronotypical swim lane. Right? So if you know what category you are in, early bird, you know that staying up until midnight is not going to serve you well, right? That only works if you're a night owl. So falling within your chronotype usually is step number one. Let's talk about some of the other things that people can do, because let's say it's past your chronotype bedtime, or you missed it, or quite frankly, you don't even know what it is, right? So a couple of things you want to think about when heading to bed. So number one, have you fallen asleep on the couch already? Because here's what ends up happening is a lot of people fall asleep on the couch. When they go to bed, they wash their teeth, brush their face, wash their face, brush their teeth, and then they are wide awake when they get into bed at night, right? So here's a couple of different things that people could do. Number one, if you know this is you, do yourself a favor. Change into your bedclothes after dinner. Go ahead and brush your teeth and wash your face. So that way, if you do fall asleep on the couch, you can just slide yourself into the bedroom or a guest room or whatever it is you want to do and be able to get some rest without having to awaken yourself before doing so. So that's maybe trick number one. Trick number two, alcohol is the worst sleep aid on earth. More people drink themselves to sleep than any other single thing, and it's really, really bad. Let me explain why. Alcohol makes you feel sleepy, but the one thing it doesn't do is it doesn't allow you to get into deep sleep, and it basically destroys it, which is part of the reason why you have a hangover the next day. Now, this becomes critically important when you start to know what happens during stage 3-4 sleep when you're sleeping. So alcohol has a big effect on stage 3-4 sleep. Stage 3-4 sleep is where the glymphatic system actually scoops proteins out of your brain, so that way they don't accumulate. So when every time you have a thought, something happens and a protein can be excreted. And so when these proteins gather in your head, they wrap around the nerves. That's called Alzheimer's disease. We don't like that. And so when you sleep, the waste management system of the brain comes in and it pulls all that crap out of there, but only if you get stage 3-4 sleep. And if you're drinking alcohol to make you fall asleep, you don't get stage 3-4 sleep. So what ends up happening is these proteins accumulate. So as we get older, I'm 56 years old, I treasure my stage 3-4 sleep. So alcohol before bed, that's a really stupid idea, Michael. Right? But I like scotch and I like wine. So how do I do that? So here's what I do. It takes the average human 1 hour to digest one alcoholic beverage. So here's what I'll do is let's say my wife and I are going to have dinner. It's 7 o'clock. I'll have a glass of wine with the first part of the meal. Then I have a glass of water. Again, slow myself down. My second glass of wine comes towards the end of the meal. Have my second glass of water. Now let's say it's 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. Let's say it's 8 o'clock. 3 hours later, that should be 8, 9, 10, 11 o'clock. It's roughly time for me to go to bed, right? 2 drinks, 2 glasses of water, 3 hours. I had my adult beverage. I go to sleep. It's out of my system because I was drinking the water to get it out. And now I sleep just fine, right? It's just about thinking and understanding biology. Cannabis is roughly the same way. So I live in California. A lot of people use cannabis. By the way, if you go to a dispensary in California, there are only 3 reasons I think why people use cannabis: recreation, pain, and sleep. That's it. That's because I've surveyed tons of people in these dispensaries and asked them. They're all there for either pain or sleep or just for recreation. If you're going to use cannabis as a sleep aid, it's not about getting stoned. It's about using it in a medicinal fashion where you use only a certain amount and only certain constituents to allow you to get yourself to sleep. As an example, there's data now to look at something called CBN, as in nighttime. This is not CBD, this is CBN, which is actually oxidized THC. And what that does is that's one of the things that when you ingest it, it makes you feel very, very sleepy. And there's new data out to show that it lowers awakenings. Now, I want to be clear. That doesn't mean I want everybody who listens to this podcast running out and grabbing CBN cannabis. What I'm talking about here is thinking through some ideas of what's helpful and what's not helpful before bed. Another big thing that a lot of people don't think about, and this isn't even a substance, but it's emotions before bed. I want to be clear. When it's 9:30, 10 o'clock at night and you climb into bed with your partner or spouse, it is not the time to have a major emotional discussion. Okay? Because what happens? Your heart rate spins up and then you can't fall asleep. The metric is you need a heart rate of 60 or below to enter into a state of unconsciousness. What happens when you're pissed off and fighting with your partner? Heart rate's way up. It's not worth it, right? So thinking about it, what I tell people all the time, you need runway to land the plane, right? So what is that runway? A couple of different things. And this is where we're going to get some more hydration and some more breathing stuff in here. So number one, when do you stop fluids? So I don't know about you, but I hate getting up in the middle of the night to have to pee because then sometimes I can't fall back asleep. So I stop drinking fluids approximately an hour before bed. I use what I call the 3-2-1 rule. So 3 hours before bed, I stop alcohol. 2 hours before bed, I stop food. 1 hour before bed, I stop fluids. Okay. And that seems to work well for me. People can modify that however you want. You can stop everything 3 hours before bed, see if it works for you, especially if you're a guy who has to wake up in the middle of the night to use the restroom more than once. That could have something to do with the amount of fluids that you're taking in. That's where hydration comes from. So when we're talking about hydration, one of the biggest problems, and this disrupts sleep, by the way, is what people do is they're really conscious about their water and they've got their glass of water, their jug, they're measuring it, everything out. And all of a sudden they say, oh shit, it's 9 o'clock and I forgot to drink my water. And they just pound as much water as they can. This is the dumbest idea on earth, okay? Let me explain. Number one, your body can't absorb that much water that quickly. So guess what's going to happen? You're going to have to pee. And that's going to disrupt your sleep. So stop being stupid and sip your water. Don't gulp your water and drink it more towards the beginning part of the day. This is why I've got sleep, hydration, and breathing all together, is because they're all intermixed. And if people just follow my 3-week plan, where what we do is we actually take your phone, you set an alarm for 5 times throughout the day. And that's where you're checking on your hydration, you're checking on your breathing, and you've already done a few things to get ready for bed. It only takes 5 minutes, 5 times a day. It's actually quite simple to do. In 3 weeks, it all becomes a habit, right? And then you're done. Right? Then just like you wake up normally without an alarm, then your body will naturally start drinking at these different times of day. And then you're not giving yourself such a hard time. But unfortunately, so many of us don't think about hydration until later in the day.
Yeah. Man, I don't even know how to follow it up. That was a fire hose of information talking about hydration.
People got to get used to me. I'm just going to let it out.
I love it. I love it. One of the questions I was going to ask was about eating before bedtime. So I know you obviously answered that 2 hours before.
But I have an interesting anecdote about that. I was at a conference a couple of weekends ago where I heard a fellow named Brian Johnson speak. I don't know if you've seen this guy. He's on the internet and he's like the most tested person out there and all these kind of things. I met Brian. I actually got an opportunity to have dinner with him. He was quite an interesting fellow. But one of the things he said to me that I thought was really remarkable, and I don't have any science behind this because I just kind of learned it from him, He said he stops eating at 11 a.m. and goes to bed at like 8 o'clock. So he doesn't have any food intake for like 9 hours before bed. And when I talked to him about it, he said, Michael, that was the single thing that made the most difference in my overall quality of sleep, which I thought was really fascinating because, I mean, to be fair, he's an experiment of one person, so I'm not putting a whole lot of science behind it, but it really opens up my mind to the idea that, hey, I wonder like what we should be doing about that. We really don't have any great recommendations. And here in the United States, most people eat their biggest meal at night, not their smallest meal at night. So, you start to wonder, like, how does that have an effect on this as well?
Yeah, that's definitely a lot to think about because, like you said, most people will eat their biggest meal before bed, and a lot of people are doing it literally, an hour or two before they go to sleep.
Well, and you know what? I don't know if you get this feeling. I'm curious. I get this feeling is like when I have the biggest meal, I feel so good. Like my stomach is big. I feel relaxed. I feel like I don't feel bloated. I just feel like, oh, that's what I needed. I feel really good. I'm just going to close my eyes. I definitely feel like on occasion when I eat a big meal, it makes me feel sleepy, but it doesn't last for very long. And it doesn't work very well in the long run because if I do happen to fall asleep right after I eat, I wake up within 20 minutes. I've got to go to the bathroom and something's going on with my stomach. So I try to really monitor the amount of food that I eat because that also seems to have something.
Makes sense. So back to hydration. Are we all drinking a gallon of water a day or what's the magic number there?
Fuck no. So here's what you need to do is there's a lot of different ways to go about thinking about how much hydration do you need. I'm going to tell you, I worked it through and here's the basic formula. Take the amount of weight that you have in pounds and multiply it by 0.6. That's it, by 0.6. So a 100-pound person is going to drink 60 ounces of water. A 200-pound person would be at 120 ounces of water. That sounds like a tremendous amount of water, and it is. So if you need to pull back some, that's a good kind of goal to reach for, but I don't like to make it too complicated for folks. I will tell you that if you work out and you have a normal water regimen, it would be great to increase that water regimen because you do sweat out a decent amount. People also like to ask me about these things that they call hydration multipliers. So that's like the powders that you pour into the water that's supposed to make you have more water. They don't do that. They're just salt, zinc, vitamin B, and things like that. I don't mind them, but I wouldn't use them every day. I use hydration multipliers like if I'm a runner and I'm doing my run during the week, if I'm doing my long run on the weekend, that's when I might use one, right? Or if I like to hike and I go on a hike for a couple, 3 hours with my buddies, I would use a hydration multiplier in my thermos then, because again, I'm not going to be within water. I need to make sure that my body, it's all about a salt, kind of water ratio that you're trying to get to. So I tell people that kind of stuff all the time. Then the other sip, don't gulp is arguably my biggest one. And then the timing of that hydration, I think, is important. I guess the other thing that's probably worth mentioning for just a half a second here, I did a detailed analysis of the different water filters out there. Quality in, quality out, right? And so there's some really crappy water out there. I actually give in the book, there's a website that you can punch in your zip code and it will tell you exactly what your tap water has got in it or doesn't have in it, which is kind of scary, by the way, because I did it for mine and there were all kinds of pollutants, so the way that the sewage companies treat the water is with chemicals to basically pull all the bacteria out and things like that. But when they rinse the water and get those chemicals out, they leave a small trace amount of those chemicals, which builds up over time. And that's what a lot of people are drinking. So not to be a fear monger by any stretch of the imagination, but you need to filter your water. Now we have a secondary problem, which is a lot of people like to drink water out of water bottles, but now we've got this nanoplastics crap going on where everybody's got nanoplastics in their brain because the plastic leaches into the water. So my favorite thing is go buy a Brita water filter, put your tap water in there and just drink it in a glass or in a steel can and call it a day. But know the quality of the water that you're getting because I think that's important. And I think that also kind of bleeds over to air as well. A lot of people are like, Michael, why did you tell people how to breathe? Well, to be honest with you, most people don't actually know the quality of the air that they're breathing or that breathing can actually be super duper helpful for sleep and for hydration, right? So number one, go buy a $30 air quality, air purifier for your bedroom only. Why your bedroom only? Think about it. It's the place that you spend more time than any other room in the house. You want that air to be clean. So very simple, easy way to improve your sleep by breathing better is to have better quality air. Another thing to remember is sleep apnea, right? And so, I'm a sleep specialist. And one of the things that is really important to me is that people get diagnosed with sleep apnea when they need to. So many people feel like crap every morning and they have no idea that they actually have an undiagnosed case of sleep apnea. Now, granted, there are good treatments and there are difficult treatments for sleep apnea, but the good news is that it's a treatable situation and it can make you feel a whole lot better. Again, on the breathing side of things, it becomes super duper important.
Yeah, it's very interesting you mentioned breathing, because I feel like most people don't think about breathing as a thing that they can even do differently other than just, hey, they're alive, they're breathing, cool, I checked the box, I'm breathing, let's move on to something else.
So if I may, I want to give an example of things that people can do for breathing that can actually help their health and in fact help their sleep. So I have a little bit of anxiety at times, especially when I'm on television or I go in front of big crowds. My heart gets a little flutter. I get the butterflies, in my stomach. And so I do a breathing technique right before. And this is a technique that I've been teaching my patients, and they actually now use it in the middle of the night for a very specific purpose. So the technique is called 4-7-8 breathing. It's exactly what it sounds like. It was developed by a Dr. Andrew Weil for the Navy SEALs. So if you're a Navy SEAL and you're a sniper and you're shooting down range, if you don't slow down your heart rate and it's beating too fast, you can actually change the trajectory of the bullet, right? But if we slow all those guys and gals' heart rates down to about 60 beats per minute, they can fire in between heartbeats and there's no problem. And it's perfect for us because that's the level we want for unconsciousness. So it's exactly what you think it is. You slowly breathe in for a count of 4, you hold for a count of 7, and you breathe out for a count of 8. Let me explain the biology and why this works so well in sleep. So I use it before I get on stage, but my patients use it in the middle of the night. And to be fair, I've used it in the middle of the night a few times when I've woken up and had insomnia. I'm not a perfect sleeper just because I'm a sleep doctor, by the way. Like everybody out there's got sleep issues on one level or another. So what's cool about 4-7-8 breathing is most people are really shallow breathers. They don't actually extend the lung and right? They're kind of like, and they're only using half of their lung. When you're only using half your lung, your heart has to beat twice as much because your body needs all of your lung, right? So by taking a big deep breath in, holding that breath, and then pushing all of that excess carbon dioxide out, when you come in, you fill the whole lung, your heart beats half as fast, which lowers your heart rate. So that's reason 1 I like it. Reason 2, you have to count while you're doing it. The biggest problem that my patients have in the middle of the night is when they wake up and their brain turns on and they get pissed off and they start thinking about work, start thinking about family, start thinking about all kinds of things that they shouldn't be thinking about in the middle of the night. But if you're counting and breathing at the same time, you can't think of anything else. And that's the beauty of the 4-7-8 technique, which is part of the reason why I think breathing is so important to so many other things. Yes, we all know how to breathe. Otherwise, we wouldn't be alive and walking this earth. But if I told you that by mastering or even learning one technique for your breathing, you could actually improve a whole host of other areas of your health, like your insomnia, it'd probably be worth it to learn how to breathe in for 4 seconds, hold for 7 seconds, and push out for 8. Right? That's the part of the knowledge. And so what's cool about the program in the book is I have people we explain a whole host of different breathing techniques, nothing too technical. I want to be super duper clear. I'm not some, yogi who understands all this stuff. I'm a regular guy who never did breathing techniques in his life before. And now I love them and they do so much for me and my family. But they're not incredibly difficult. They can be a lot of fun. And once you learn it and master it, it's literally like a secret code for you to lower anxiety when you have it or to give you energy when you want it. It's pretty amazing.
Wow. I will definitely have to do some research on that. How do you measure the quality of your breath?
So it's a great question. So in the book, I have 5 different tests that you can do to test yourself from a respiratory standpoint. Because it turns out there's different aspects to breathing that are going to be important. One thing we do is we just look at your overall respiration rate. That tells us a lot about your overall health. Then we ask you to look at the depth of your breath. So as an example, if you walk up a flight of stairs, are you breathing heavy when you get to the top or are you breathing lightly? right? So how much volume do you require for some type of exercise? Other things have to do with the ability to push out air, to force air out of your lungs. There's a measurement that you can do. You can breathe into something that will tell us that. I give you 5 different things that you can do in the book. None of them cost any money, thankfully, that you can try. And once you get that down, based on your age and your gender, I tell you what the norms are, and then we give you a way to make it a little bit better. So an example of this would be if you're sitting here and your respiration rate is like 80, that ain't good, right? So then we need to give you some ideas. So then I teach you progressive muscle relaxation, lowers your heart rate, lowers your breathing rate. Now you're feeling better. Like those are the things that we try to do. But excuse me, the good news is in the book, super simple tests that you can measure exactly what your breathing is and set some goals and move forward. By the way, this isn't, it's not like if you have emphysema, if you have COPD, you can still do these techniques. Like if you have a lung disorder, in fact, these would be really good things for you to learn because they might actually help you in the long run in different other areas. So I feel like, I know it sounds weird, like I'm teaching people how to breathe and I'm teaching people how to drink water and I'm teaching people how to sleep, but dude, it has a profound effect on their overall health.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, especially when you narrow it down to just be that simple, where it's not, hey, let's look at 40,000 different diseases or other pills they need to take to counteract other pills.
Yeah, I don't have the time for that. You're getting to know me. I'm a very practical guy. And I'm not a big theory guy. I'm a big tactics guy. Like, I just want to know exactly what you want me to do so I can get from point A to point B. That's really what I'm interested in. And that's really what I try to do in my books and in my videos. Like if people swing over to YouTube, you can see me at the Sleep Doctor channel where I think I have over 750 videos where we literally break down all of these different things for sleep, for hydration, for breathing, things like that.
Yeah, that's amazing. So talking tactical, what's one thing someone could do today that would give them, a leg up, give them a slightly better life?
Oh, so that's easy. And I might have mentioned it before, but I can give the biological reasons for it now, is if anybody out there, if all you did was one thing, actually, I'd want you to do 3, but I'm going to give you one, which is number 1, wake up at the same time 7 days a week. I know I spoke about it a little before, but again, this has the largest effect on melatonin production at night. So it's super easy. Just set your damn alarm 7 days a week. Now, I will tell you that sometimes people will tell me they're like, Saturday is the worst for that, Michael. Like, what do you have any hacks for that? I do. Absolutely. Set the alarm on your phone for the loudest possible volume that you have. Put your phone all the way across the room when you plug it in at night, which forces you to get up and go turn it off. Also, you've now pissed off your bed partner. So you probably want to get out of the room anyway. So go ahead and keep going and go to the bathroom and kind of do your thing. If that doesn't work, consider an accountability partner, right? So you probably know somebody who wakes up at Saturday at roughly the same time you do. Call them up and say, hey, could you do me a favor? I'm trying to do something new. Could you text me or call me each morning at 6:30 on Saturday and Sunday? I know you're already up and I'm trying to get myself to wake up. Or schedule a 5-minute phone call with that person. Maybe it's your mom, maybe it's your kid, maybe it's somebody that's in a different time zone that you don't get an opportunity to talk to very often. You now have extra time in your day. What do you want to do with it, man? Right? So this is one way that you can add a person into that life, and now you've changed your entire attitude. When I talk to my daughter in the mornings, my whole day goes better because I like talking to my daughter, right? And it's a way to keep me waking up. She lives in Virginia. I live in California. So you know what she does? She calls me every single morning. She knows I get up between 5:30 and 6. So what does she do? It's 9 o'clock her time, 6 o'clock my time. I get a call from my daughter. And I know if I'm in bed and that phone is ringing, I need to be out of bed. Right? It's just that accountability that makes it kind of work. The second thing that I would tell people to do is sip, don't gulp, and really try to get in some water. And if you can, stop fluids, later in the day. It's just one of those things that's going to, make you urinate throughout the night. And then the last thing I would say to people is one of the biggest things that I've told you about 4-7-8 breathing, but another thing that I think is really good is just a big sigh. Just dude, I just feel better when I do that. Like it releases stress. And by the way, if you look at the data, it actually works really, really well. So I want people to think of breathing as a two-way street. Breathing, if you increase your heart rate, breathing can give you energy, like if you're running a race. or if if it helps decrease your heart rate by slowing your breathing down to help you to sleep. So this is a guidepost that you can use in either direction.
Well, I love that. This was, I am so mind blown by the depth of information you've shared. I am going to go back and watch this episode about 4 times myself to recapture it all. Thank you. A tremendous honor to have this conversation. I'm hopeful that a lot of people will get some nuggets out of this. Where can we learn more? Yeah, but for real, where can people learn more? Because there's a lot to learn here.
Sure. So if people want to swing over to thesleepdoctor.com, that's my website. I also own all the social properties. But to be super duper honest with you, I need people to go out and buy the book. Number one, it's really good. Like, I love this book. I'm super excited about it. I think it's one of the best ones that I've ever written. But also, in order to put out content, and be on podcasts and do all these things, I need support. So if people out there got anything out of this podcast, do me a favor. If you can, buy a book. And if you don't think the book is for you, I bet you know somebody out there that this would make a great gift for. Like, hey, I care about you. I think you need this. I would love to have that opportunity to help your friends.
I love that. And it's a great time of year to start buying gifts for people. How coincidental, right? Well, listen, I, again, appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation. I got a lot out of it, and I know that our audience will as well. So just want to thank you and honor you for all you've done. And again, thank you so much.
Thanks, Jim. And for all you folks out there, sweet dreams.